The 2022 midterms are fast approaching, and with it, the potential to set America on the right track. But in doing so, we must not forget the importance of principles. So, my friends, unless you've been living under a rock, you will know that the 2022 midterm elections, which will determine the ideological orientation of both the House and the Senate in the United States, has been all the talk of political media, and it has and different events during the midterms have reverberated across the political spectrum, and they have trickled down to the sort of public discourse, and they've caused a lot of conversation. And in doing this analysis, I want to make one thing clear. It is not my goal to advocate for a candidate or to advocate for a party. I do not have any pretense of partisanship here. But rather, it is my goal as someone who loves America, as someone who adores the Constitution and its principled foundations, which make America one of the most unique countries to ever be created on this world. I want to make sure that people are voting and supporting candidates who have all of those things in mind as well. So, during these election seasons, the midterms or the presidential election or whatever election are almost always talked about in terms of party strategy and partisan victory. You will see on election night, on midterms night, all of the talking heads and the news analysts pulling up graphs, big coarse-grained charts of candidates who won in one year and how their victory flipped the party, flipped the orientation of a chamber here or a chamber there. You'll see that kind of stuff. And because that kind of analysis is so common, many people don't think of the midterms outside of a purely strategic political consequence, strategic political context. But I think that if we're going to get the most that we can out of the midterms, we have to consider the context in which they happen, and that is the context of principles. The biggest problem today in politics is that a lot of people would rather be a good tribesman or a tribeswoman. They'd rather be quite tribal, as opposed to being someone who stands on something bigger than the preservation of their tribe. And in being tribal, all they care about is the victory of their tribe, which is why many people have been saying that you have to vote Republican or vote Democrat and worry about the election and nothing else. I have seen that on both sides quite a bit, but I have especially seen it in an intoxicating way on the Republican side. And I find this approach to be rather compartmentalized and one-sided without an idea of principles. And what are these principles I talk about? These principles I talk about, my friends, are the foundational principles of America. The ideas, again, that distinguished America from every other political system in the world. The idea that the individual has moral agency and that moral agency must be respected by both society and the government. The idea that the governed, not the government, decide the legitimate basis for government, and the governed, by exercising their consent, can continue to act as a check on the power of the government. The idea that checks and balances will mete out and destroy or diminish the potential for tyrannical overreach of government. These are basic principles that are fundamental to the American constitutional structure and which transcend the American constitutional structure. And yet, if we focus entirely on the victory of our preferred candidates, we're going to forget these things and possibly lose these things. Then an election, or electoral victory rather, will not be the worst of our problems. A country, or having a country still, will be the worst of our problems. As Ben Franklin said after the signing of the Constitutional Convention, someone asked, "Sir, what do we have?" And he said, "A republic, if you can keep it." That's how we have to view the midterm elections. So let's go from the universal now. We've established first principles to the particular. There have been several races where a lack of principles has actually shown the weakness of candidates in those races. So, for example, Pennsylvania, Dr. Oz versus John Fetterman. Now, everyone understands that John Fetterman is probably not competent to be senator. He had a bad stroke, which I wish him the best of recovery, but it has rendered him diminished in his capacity to reason and speak, which means he wouldn't be a very effective senator. But also, independent of the stroke, Fetterman was a bad candidate in the first place because he didn't have very strong core grasp of his ideas and things of that sort. Dr. Oz is seen by some people as the lesser of two evils. In fact, I have heard this term used several times. I'll get to that in a second. But Dr. Oz has his own problems. Dr. Oz has been called out for offering miracle cures on his show. He has been called out, most certainly, for being ideologically inconsistent. You see, Dr. Oz is an old man. He's in his 60s, going towards his 70s. He's had a lifetime of being a public figure and expressing his opinions in a very public way. And over the past 2 years, Dr. Oz's opinions have done compared to the past 2 years, Dr. Oz's opinions have done a 360 shift when it became politically convenient for him. Now again, this is not a value judgment of Oz as a candidate. Vote for who you want to vote for. But this is evidence that when we accept this idea of a lesser of two evils and we check our principles at the door, you will end up getting a candidate who is not convicted in the right kind of moral thinking, who does not have the fire within him to continue to preserve America, to fight back against the forces that conspire against America within our own country. You will simply get someone who will go on to do the bidding of Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy, who I'll discuss in a second here. So this idea of principles is not merely abstract philosophical talk, as some of you may think. It's actually core to assessing if a candidate is a worthwhile candidate to support. Now, when we talk about the lesser of two evils, we should reject the premise. Evil is evil and has no place in a free society amongst a moral and virtuous people. Evil is evil and should be rejected. The moment evil becomes convenient is the moment the fight for good, the fight for what is correct, loses. And we lose sight of what the proper condition of politics and society is. The proper condition of society is not a balance between good and evil. The proper condition of society is an infusion of basic common sense principles which go towards the good, which go towards what is right, not a balance between common sense principles and evil principles. That's one. But let's assume that I accept this idea, that we should support a candidate because he is the lesser of two evils. We have to understand, what is that lesser of two evils going into when he wins? Well, he's going into an even bigger pool of evil, because if the Republicans win, as I hope they do, the Senate and the House, this midterm election, they're going to be led by two men, Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell. Now, Kevin McCarthy is a liar. He's a deceiver. He is two-faced. He exists to serve the interest of the establishment class. He exists to preserve the administrative state. Good example of this. When the abolish the FBI rhetoric was being tossed around, as it continually is, and I think that's the correct response towards an agency which is so wired to the core, Kevin McCarthy had a muted response to it. And he has not vowed today, still today, to go against the FBI when his caucus takes power. He has been completely mealy-mouthed and milquetoast on the issue. Mitch McConnell, during the Trump presidency, opposed President Trump on almost every step of the way, except in measures that explicitly furthered his own political agenda. And Mitch McConnell has been caught basically using the government to give favors to his favorite political entities, such as the tobacco industry. Mitch McConnell has no conception of what is morally correct. Mitch McConnell has a conception of what is politically advantageous for him. Most politicians act like this. And we should also mention that Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy funded candidates to go against non-establishment types in these primaries, many of those candidates which lost. So not only is this lesser of two evil going into a pool of evil, they will likely be directed by people who embrace evil as a principle, as it were. So this idea of a lesser of two evils is destructive to our republic. And in voting during this midterm election, it's important that you don't vote for lesser of two evils. You vote for the person who you believe is going to protect this country, this nation, at its foundations, and respect those foundations whilst governing. But again, the conversation, this midterm season, is almost entirely about, can my party win? How can I advance my tribe? And this tribalism clouds us from being able to see the bigger picture. The bigger picture is this, my friends. America is facing a political context in which the FBI has flagrantly gone after its political opponents, in which they have charged a former president of the United States for a reason, by the way, that they had not been able to justify so far, 3 months or so after him being investigated. They have also gone after several of his people in his MAGA orbit because they believe that they had something to do with a cause they're pursuing. This is an organization that has been at the center of a lot of political evil in America for decades, going all the way back to the days of J. Edgar Hoover. And this is an organization that continues to pose an existential threat to America. In fact, Jim Jordan's report the other day that basically showed the FBI is purging conservative employees. They are using domestic or foreign and surveillance tactics to spy on American citizens. Things that anyone who was paying attention already knew. This stuff is coming into the light. The significance of this midterm season is that that stuff is going to be challenged by a Republican majority House. But is it going to go anywhere? Is it going to result in any lasting change? Is it going to actually protect the Republic? If you vote for the lesser of two evils, no, it won't. You'll get the Mitch McConnell and the Kevin McCarthy style of doing things. The style of doing things that produces nothing more than ideas and measures that perpetuate the current system. We exist in a context where a president of the United States, a sitting president, has tried to force American citizens against their personal principle of self-governance to take a medicine they did not want to take by executive fiat. That's Joe Biden. We exist in a context where Joe Biden has shut down free trade between nations, particularly to punish Russian people, as he said himself, but also, in effect of doing that, destroyed the global economy and is continually laying waste to the American economy. We exist in a context where a monstrous infrastructure program was passed, on the presumption that it is the government's job to dictate the conditions of our roads and our infrastructure, when government has been doing that for a very long time, and they've been doing it quite poorly, and that bill also had several other things smuggled into it, which had nothing to do with its ostensible aims. We exist in a existentially important context, my friends, which is why this midterm season is so important. But nothing will go anywhere unless all of us are willing to put aside the tribalism, to put aside the cheering for your team, put aside holding your nose and voting for lesser of two evils, and actually fight evil. Actually vote your conscience. Actually stand on principle. Now, look, I want there to be investigations of the FBI, these agencies. I want these things that are supposed to happen under a Republican majority Senate and House to happen. I want heads to roll. But I understand that if we keep putting people into power that don't respect the pursuit of truth, that don't respect the Constitution in the first place, nothing will change. So, this midterm season, my message to all of you is that we have to remember who we are to get to where we want to get. As an American, who are you? Ask yourself that question. Are you someone who is willing to be subjected to tyranny from either political side? Are you someone who is willing to ignore the very basis of our political structure? Are you someone who's willing to make compromises that ultimately lead nowhere and endanger your moral integrity? Are you someone like that? Or are you someone in the radical tradition of our founding fathers who will stand up for what is right no matter what team benefits? If you have that in your mind while you vote this midterm season, I think that the country itself will be much better off. But again, we have to remember a few core things. As I mentioned, we have to remember those things. We have to hold them against our breast, and we have to treat them with fervent devotion. This midterm season, I hope that we see the beginning of a new era for America, the beginning of a pushback from the governed, a check on the administrative state. Because over the past 2 years, they have been out of control. But I'm not so sure that's going to be the case with the way people think. But maybe it will be. That's up to you. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love me, please be sure to subscribe to this channel. Be sure to comment on this video. Please be sure to like this video. Be sure to share this video. If you want to buy some of my merchandise, you have the Christian Watson logo on your shirt or on your coffee mug, go to christianjwatson.com. Man, I love all you guys. Again, vote your conscience. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but vote in the interests of America. That's all I'll say. I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.